Welcome. My name is Tamás Marec. I work for Danube Institute, and my first guest in the program, Rod Dreher, actually my colleague at the Danube Institute. Rod, thank you for your time to participating in this program. And there was a huge event in Washington, D.C. recently. And 1st of April, at the Heritage Foundation, there was a screening of a film. The title is the same title than your book, which was published some years ago.
Live Not My Lies.
Exactly. And the laudatio was held by the Vice President, JD Vance. And my first question is, were you surprised by the very personal and friendly laudatio what he had?
Yeah, JD Vance and I have been friends since 2016 when his book, Hillbilly, Elegy, came out. As he explained to the audience in Washington, I read the book after it came out. The book had not been very popular, but I loved it. We did an interview, and the interview went mega viral. And it was an ordinary interview, but somehow it went mega viral. Within 1 week, JD was on all the national TV shows. His book went to the top of the bestseller list. It stayed there for over 1 year, and it launched his career. So his coming to introduce my film in Washington was, in a way, sort of paying me back, in a friendly way for the role I played in launching his career. He even said that more than anybody else, Rod Dreher is responsible for him being vice president. I hope that's true, but if things go bad, then they will use those lines in my political trial.
I checked in the Wikipedia that between you and Mr. Vice President there is 18 years. And back in the time you mentioned, the interview is 2016. And you were already known a conservative blogger, and he wasn't a public figure yet. He wasn't famous for anything, just graduated from the Yale, got married after the military service, etc. And your interview catapulted him into fame, as you mentioned. What grabbed you? Reading in his essay, the Hillbilly essay, what was the interesting elegy? Yes, what was interesting in him for you?
Yeah, well, I should say that you can't trust Wikipedia. I didn't know JD before I interviewed him, but when I read that book, I realized that he was telling something deeply true and deeply important about America. The book is about how he grew up in a family that was very broken. He didn't really know his father. His mother was a drug addict, and he was raised by his grandmother. And it's a story about an entire culture, white working class culture, that had been broken in part by what had happened with free trade, the loss of jobs, but other things too. And I realized that nobody had told this story in America. This is a story of millions of Americans, but nobody had told it, and JD did. Now, I didn't grow up like JD. I had a good family, a family that was together, but I grew up around a lot of people like that. And I thought, finally, somebody is telling this true and important story. And mind you, this was happening in the year that Donald Trump was running for president. So many people in the elite media had no idea why Trump was popular. JD explained it.
The book was published, I think, in summer, and Trump won the election in November.
That's right.
So exactly the reasoning, many critics say that it was like a prophetic thing, because exactly the Rust Belt area, the blue-collar workers area of the American society was grabbed in the book, and actually the president grabbed the same voting constituency, right, to win the election. Yeah. So it was like a kind of explanation what happened in secret, because not many, even Americans, saw this layer of society, how they live. But Mr. Vance showed them, and Mr. Trump, when he won the election, showed that this is the
exactly.
There is an existence of this electorate.
Exactly. These people were hidden from the elite media and elites that run every institution because they live in the middle of the country, because they are white, they are working class. This is the sort of person that your average elite American, white Americans especially, hate. They think of them as white trash. Hillary Clinton called them deplorables, but they exist. And JD Vance gave them dignity. Now, to be sure, in his book, he does not say that they are purely victims. He talks about how in some ways they're victims of their own choices. But that's what made it so honest. He loves these people. These are his people for all of their faults. and he gave them a sense of visibility that they had never seen, that America had never seen before. And that is why JD is vice president today, I believe.
When you made the interview with him, what do you think, what was his secret? Because the interview catapulted him into fame, as I mentioned, but was it because of the writing, the effect of his writing, the Elegy, or maybe his personality? He was an interesting man or something, which...
I think it's primarily the writing. You know, he's a very good writer, and the story he told resonated with so many Americans. Either they knew somebody like that, they were somebody like that, or they were curious about this sort of person who had been hidden before. And JD, when he went on national TV to talk about it, he's a very likable man. He went to Yale Law School, so he had come from this impoverished background and made it to the very heights of American society, and he knew how to explain where he came from in a language that elites and ordinary people can understand. Plus, he's also a really likable man. We saw this during the 2024 presidential election. When Trump named him as the vice presidential choice, a lot of the Democrats were saying, oh, he's a very weird guy, he's an awful guy. But then JD went on podcasts, he went on interviews, and he came across as a normal man, very likable, but also one who was very sharp and had very sharp opinions and critiques. And he was able to fight back in a way that that was disarming to people who wanted to portray him as some sort of, bully.
And actually, he thanked you in his speech at the Heritage Foundation that you helped him prepare for this public role, speaking his ideas in front of a hostile audience. This is the exact expression that he used. What role did you play in his career? After that, you made the interview in 2016.
Right. Well, we became friends after that, and he's a decent man. We actually liked each other, and he would call me for advice on politics and on media strategy, and I helped him understand how the elite media would see him. Because I had been, for all of my career, I started my career as a journalist in 1989, and if you're a conservative working in mainstream American media, you're isolated and alone. But you learn a lot about how the liberals in the media think. And I helped JD understand that, things that he should say, things he should not say. And I didn't know that this was helping him so much. It was just a phone call between two men who are friends. So I was surprised to hear him say that that really mattered to him.
And did he discuss with you the plans he want to get into public life in American politics, being close to the Republican Party and later going for a public job like being a senator for Ohio? Did he mention to you?
He did. He was thinking about running for the U.S. Congress, for the House of Representatives in 2018, because his book had become a real phenomenon. But his wife, Usha, was against it. And I met his wife. I stayed with the Vances once in their house in Cincinnati. Usha is the rock of that family. She's brilliant, but she's very, very solid. And JD doesn't do anything without her approval. And I remember telling him, I hope you run. I want you to be a politician. I want you to be president one day, but you must not do anything without your wife at your side. And so he decided not to run that year. But then, of course, he did later. The thing that radicalized JD and made him pro-Trump, because remember, he was against Trump in 2016. He thought Trump was articulating the proper grievances of the working class, but he didn't think Trump gave answers. 2 years go by, it's 2018. Brett Kavanaugh was Trump's nominee for the U.S. Supreme Court. JD and Usha were friends with Kavanaugh, and JD contacted me and said, I really hope you will consider promoting Kavanaugh in your writing, etc. We had his hearings in Washington, and the Democrats, the media, the liberal activists absolutely savaged that man, but Trump would not back away from him. And that told JD a couple of things. First, Trump is a fighter. And second, Trump might not be perfect, but he's the only thing people like us have fighting for us. And that began to switch JD from being anti-Trump to pro-Trump. And then, of course, as the great awakening happened and Biden takes office and wokeness has the force of U.S. government policy, JD saw how overwhelming the power of the left was and how Trump is the only thing standing between us and them.
You mentioned that he criticized Trump, and I checked your interview back last night, and I found some sentences, even in the interview, he criticizes Trump, even if he was already a fan of Mr. Trump as a candidate for the presidency in 2016. But he mentioned some characteristics of Mr. Trump which he didn't really like. And as I remember, yourself, you didn't really support Trump in the early days. What made you and what made Mr. Vance to get to like him and his policies later on?
Yeah, it's the thing I just explained, that, you know, Trump is very far from perfect, but he is standing against an overwhelming left-wing elite class that will do anything possible to repress and discredit their critics on the right. And I think my own personal view of Trump tracked the same path as JD. You know, we began to see that in Trump's first presidency, in his first term, he was not as bad as we were all told he would be. And not only that, he did some good things. And we realized in the end, Trump is all we have. And I think now that JD is the vice president, Trump is in his second term, we are seeing Trump got very, very serious after his first term. He learned the mistakes he made, and now he's pushing very hard for the policies that we all wanted to see.
Thank you. You mentioned the character of Mr. Trump and the vice president and so. But I would ask something which you may know in deeper terms than the average American, average Hungarian viewer. What we saw at the speech of Mr. Vance at the Munich Security Conference, and what we saw is some sentences in the signal scandal, the signal gate problem. Many Europeans consider him an arrogant man and maybe a dangerous man for the transatlantic relations between Europe and US. Do you see in him this kind of danger fact or not?
No, I don't. I'll tell you this. JD sincerely loves Europe. He loves Europe for what it stands for. It is the basis of Western civilization. That's where it came from. I remember showing JD around Paris, my favorite city, in 2018, and he loved it there. What he doesn't love and who he doesn't love are the European elites, the elite class. And that's what he came to Munich to attack. He said, the biggest problem you all face is in your own countries. You're not dealing with migration and the problems that come from mass migration. And you're trying to deal with it by suppressing free speech. You know, so when JD talks about how much he hates Europe, he's talking about the Brussels ruling class. I remember talking to him over the years after I moved to Hungary in 2021. I would tell him on text that, you know, you really need to come to Hungary. Hungary is not like the rest of these countries. Here, it's very sensible. They're people like us. And in fact, he was going to come to Hungary in October of 2023, I guess it was, but then there was the October 7th attack in Israel, and the US Senate was called into session. The point simply is this: when you hear JD speak harshly about Europe, he's not talking about ordinary Europeans. He's talking about their governments and the ruling class.
I understand. Thank you. Vice President said on the moral lesson of your book in this speech and the Heritage Foundation, a quotation from him, "We are not going to solve the problems of the West unless we have the courage to speak the truth, and no solving the problems if we don't have the courage to live in truth." So he likes to talk about the truth, and your book title is almost the same, like "Live not by the lies," which is the opposite of the truth, of course. But what is the truth?
What is the truth? Pontius Pilate asked, what is truth?
Yeah.
The title of the...
I'm asking this exactly because of this, because the truth is kind of a religious, it's a transcendent term, but you use it in a political language. So what is the truth?
Well, the title of the book, Live Not by Lies, comes from the last letter that Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote to his followers in the Soviet Union before the Soviets expelled him in 1974. And in that letter, Solzhenitsyn said to the Soviet people, None of us can stand in Red Square shouting down with the government. They'll take you to the gulag. That will be the end of you. It's very hard to stand against a totalitarian government, but one thing everybody can do, no matter how powerless, is to refuse to live by lies. What did he mean by that? He meant that you should not sign something that you don't believe in. You should not go to meetings where the truth cannot be spoken. There's so many small ways that we can maintain our own dignity, our own integrity, by refusing to go along with what the power expects of us. So in a Western context today, we can refuse to do things like wear the LGBT pride banner, which you see everywhere. We can refuse to put signs in the windows of our businesses saying that we agree with Black Lives Matter or LGBT pride if we don't believe it. If you believe it, fine. But if you don't believe it, you must refuse to say that something you don't believe. And this is so important because, as Solzhenitsyn taught, and also Václav Havel, the first president of free Czechoslovakia, if a system is built on lies, it depends on the fear that people have of saying, I don't believe that. But if enough people are willing to suffer for the truth, then eventually that system will collapse. So the reason this book and this documentary, which is on angel.com, everybody can stream it, the reason it exists is because about 10 years ago in America, I began talking to people who had come to America to escape Soviet communism, people from Hungary, Poland, even Russia. And they were all saying the things they see happening in America with wokeness reminds them of what they left behind. That seemed extreme to me. But the more I talked to them and the more I investigated it, I saw they were right. What was coming in America and what came to America with wokeness, it's not the same as Soviet totalitarianism. That's hard totalitarianism with gulags and secret police. We have a softer form that requires you to don't sacrifice your comfort, don't sacrifice your job or your stability in society. Just say the lie. Just pretend you agree with it for the sake of preserving your comfort. This is still totalitarianism. We saw this in COVID. We have seen this on the question of race and LGBT. Right now, as you and I speak, in Britain, the government is trying to force people to ignore the Islamic violence and the rape gang scandal for the sake of keeping social harmony. The British government and the British media, the entire ruling class in that country are demanding that the British live by lies. That's the sort of thing JD Vance was talking about. Solzhenitsyn's words are not just a lesson for people living under communism, they're a lesson for people living under wokeness today.
Yeah. I remember I met you first in 2020, January. I made an interview with you in a coffee house in Budapest. You just arrived to Budapest. And you said exactly the same. You were working on the final pages of your book, and you explained exactly this soft totalitarianism. This is the expression you used. And but 5 years has passed, and we see the process in America. Trump came back, and all the wokeness wasn't so strong what we expected, right? So do you think that against all your arguments that that word, what you prophesied, maybe I can use this term, is not so strong, so this kind of new, brave new word is not so strong what you expected 5 years ago?
Well, it did become true to a greater extent under Joe Biden's presidency. And do you know, Live Not by Lies was first published in America in September 2020, just before the election. Biden won. The book got zero media coverage, which was shocking because my previous books had lots of media coverage. They totally ignored this. And I understand why, because the book calls out this so-called racial justice movement, LGBT pride, as being part of a totalitarian mentality. They totally ignored it. But the book sold over 200,000 copies, mostly by word of mouth, because people could see, ordinary Americans could see what was happening around them as being totalitarian. And this book gave them a way to understand that. So now we have Trump. Trump is back in, and thank God he's fighting back very hard against this sort of soft totalitarianism. And I think that's great. The problem is this could all go away. All of the good things Trump is doing could go away if we get another Democrat back in office. The only way to really fight this is to have a change of mentality in the people. Because you got to remember, the American people were willing to accept all of these lies without protest until Trump came back. And I think that until and unless the American people understand what was done to us and the way the media and the elites and even the US President Biden controlled the conversation to force people to accept these things, until we understand what happened and say that will never happen again, we remain at risk. And in Europe today, of course, you don't have a Donald Trump figure. Well, we do in Hungary with Viktor Orban, but most of Europe doesn't have a Donald Trump figure to push back against these lies. So the film and the book still remain much more relevant for Europe.
Finally, let's talk about the film, which was screened in Washington and will be screened. Actually, to the viewers, I say that in May, the beginning of May, there will be a screening of the film here in the Danube Institute. Who came out with the idea that this book should be adopted in a film format?
Mm-hmm. I was approached a couple of years ago by two producers who had worked with Dennis Prager, the conservative American commentator, and they said, this should be a film. I said, fantastic, I'd like to cooperate. So what I was able to do is lead them to some people from the book in Prague and Bratislava, to get them into the dissident circles. And they did a lot of the film without me being present, but they realized that this story is very relevant to Americans. But a lot of Americans won't read a book, especially young people, but they will watch a film. And I tell you, Tomasz, to see on the screen the faces of the men and women who stood up to communism and suffered greatly for it, to hear their words, to go into a place like we do in Bratislava, where the underground Catholic Church printed samizdat to keep the life of the church alive under communism. It's a very powerful experience. And I remember watching the last episode of the film. It's in 4 parts. A new one comes out every Tuesday in April. The last episode of the film, in the final minutes, I was sobbing. Now, I know this story up and down, left and right. It's very familiar to me. But to hear these same people I interviewed speaking, and to think of their courage, this is the testimony that the people of Central Europe who suffered under communism, this is the message they have for us is not only be careful and watch out for woke totalitarianism, soft totalitarianism, but also the way to respond to it is through self-sacrificial courage. And that is a story that goes right into the heart.
This is a documentary, if I understand.
It is a documentary, yeah.
You revisited the people you interviewed back some years ago,
yes.
And you made a video recording of them. So
yes,
this is
some of the same people and also some new ones. The team went to Romania, for example, and talked to some people that I hadn't talked to. The overall effect, though, is to testify to what life was like under communism for ordinary people. And also the constant message to the viewers in the West is, this could happen here too, if you let it. If you aren't willing to stand up while you still have the freedom to stand up and say, I will not live by lies, I will not submit.
This is a final word, the perfect one. Rod, thank you very much for the conversation.
Thank you, Tomasz.
And thank you for watching us. Bye-bye.